Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Janet.
Thank you for letting me in.
You're welcome. I was like, oh my God, what do I do?
But I know that other people aren't here yet because it's just about one more minute.
And I always try to start it a little early in case
I
of
know.
anything, any glitch, any issue, whatever, we have enough time to fix it,
That's good. That's very, very smart of you. Thank you so much for your
Well, it happened before already, so I know now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And here comes other people.
Yeah, there goes Kristen.
No, I'm not a member.
Valerie.
I'm not a member of this committee, but Valerie always likes to have me present for her meetings. I think she always does a
Hi,
great
Kristen.
job.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay, and you?
Hello.
Doing
Should I be
well.
should I be making you a panelist, Kristen, and not an attendee?
Yes, that would be helpful. Thank
Okay.
you.
I'm still trying to figure this out, so just
You're
bear
doing
with
a great job. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
How are you doing? I haven't seen you in well, I guess a few months
Since
now.
Bob's party.
Yeah.
Oh, you're already a panelist, Kristen.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and anybody who's
a board member is a panelist.
who's got their picture on the screen is a panelist.
Yeah, okay. And there goes Robin. Hi, Robin.
Might stay off visually.
I'm just waiting for Valerie. She wanted me to make her the host.
And she has a lot of people coming to speak tonight.
There is somebody, Anna,
Valerie.
who is a panelist.
Hi, Valerie.
Hi, Valerie.
Hello.
You're muted, Valerie.
Thank you. Will you go ahead and
Yes, I'm about to do that, but I wanted to make sure I heard you before I started.
Oh yes, of course. Yes, thank you.
And I still stand by what I said the other day.
Thank you. I'm going to we will welcome. This is the Manhattan Community Board to Economic Development and Small Business.
Hi, because once I make you a host, I'm out.
And I will be moving people over from the attendee side over onto the panelist side if you're a board member and panelist on our first agenda item, the panel. So let me just quickly share the screen and give us just a few minutes. We will get started shortly. This meeting is being recorded, so please please be aware of that this evening. So just a few minutes. Thanks.
Hey, it's Caleb.
Hey, Caleb. I think I've got just waiting on, I see Melissa. Cool. So Melissa, if you'll just accept the promotion to panelist.
And you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Great.
Valerie, can you hear me?
I can hear you, David.
Okay, great.
And I'm going to move over two of our, we're going to have some more people trickle in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. This will be posted on our YouTube page. And so this will have more syndication beyond. So I'd like us to go ahead and get started. So let me, great. All right, so I believe we have all of our panelists here. So I will go ahead and get started so we can get going at 6:33. Let me, I think I've got one, two. Caleb, we don't see you anymore.
Whoops. How about now? Whoa.
Yes.
How about now?
Yep. All right, I'm going to stop my screen share. Great. So let me just make sure that I've got gallery view for everyone. Great. Okay. Welcome everyone. It is 6:34 p.m. and this is the Manhattan Community Board 2 Economic Development and Small Business Committee meeting. We're starting off our agenda this evening with a robust and dynamic panel that I'll go ahead and introduce right now. And we'll just go ahead and get started. We've got some members of the committee that are on here, as well as other CB2 board members. First up, we've got our panel this evening. This is New York City's economic recovery, looking ahead to 2023. And I'm just going to go in alphabetical order and do quick introductions. Anna Champney is the Vice President of Research for the Citizens Budget Commission. Kenneth Ebby is the Executive Director and Chief Development Officer for Black Entrepreneurs NYC, BENYC, at the New York City Department of Small Business Services. Melissa Pumphrey is the Senior Vice President of Economic Research and Policy at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, NYC EDC. Andrew McWilliam is the Director of Economic Research, Office of the Comptroller. Puts out one of the main authors of the City Comptroller's monthly economic and fiscal outlook. I'll put a link to that in the chat, but it's definitely one of my go-to sources. And Caleb Silver, who's the Editor-in-Chief and Senior Vice President at Investopedia, which is a Dotdash Meredith brand. And Caleb and Investopedia put out the New York City Economic Recovery Index, which I saw was just published yesterday, very timely, with a score of 75 out of 100, and I'm sure he'll go more into that. And my name is Valerie De La Rosa. I'm the chair of the Economic Development and Small Business Committee, and I will be moderating the panel this evening. Thank you, all of you, for agreeing so rapidly and so quickly to visit with us this evening. From my first note to you to my note to you this afternoon, so much continues and rapidly continues to change. Just for anyone who's tuning in, who perhaps this is your first community board meeting, Manhattan Community Board 2 is Greenwich Village, West Village, Meatpacking, Soho, NoHo, Hudson Square, Nolita, West Village, Little Italy, and parts of Chinatown. And so much of, and from the 2010 census, it was about 90,000 people. I've not seen the 2020 census number. That's what's on city planning website. But as we know, we have so much of the dynamism of the city and the city's economy that comes in and out of our district. And so this is going to be, so I asked the panelists this evening to while we are having this broad conversation, I want to make sure anything that can tie into what's happening below 14th and above Canal. But of course, we also are looking at the larger macro picture. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a couple of questions. I've got the chat open, so if anyone wants to respond to what's being said, please keep it polite. And if there's some follow-on, I'll try to weave that into our discussion this evening. After about 30 minutes or so, 30, 40 minutes, I will take questions from our committee members first, from other CB2 board members, and then from that, that will be the end of the panel. And then the committee and any other board members, we will go into our discussion on fiscal year 24 capital and expense budget priorities. So with that, you're here not to hear me speak, you're here to hear these amazing people tell us what they've been seeing. So I'm going to start us off with, earlier this month, the state comptroller, Tom DiNapoli, issued his review of financial planning for New York City, citing a potential budget gap of $10 billion by 2026 for the city due to anticipated decrease in federal funding and other factors. To each of you, what does a statement like that tell you, and what sort of action steps need to be taken now? And don't let everyone start at once.
I'm happy to kick it off. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay, great. CBC has been monitoring a lot of the same sort of issues that the city and state controllers both highlighted in their report, including the one that you're referencing. And we think that these risks are really, they're real, and it's not just sort of, people who are always sort of concerned about the worst case scenario. Of that 10 billion, some part of it, one piece that I think folks should know about is that it comes from pension returns. So the city's pension funds underperformed last year. Most pension funds underperformed. The market did very poorly. But what that means is that in order to maintain the funding, the city will be required to increase their contributions starting in fiscal 24. And by fiscal year 26, it's a couple $1 billion more. So that's not, a number that has yet to be decided or may not happen. That's sort of, I think, on the books, as is the fiscal cliff, which is what they've referred to it, we refer to it, which is the programs that are funded either with city dollars or federal dollars that are funded this year aren't funded next year. And so the question is, once you start to fund those and meet all of the needs that folks have, where are you going to find the revenue? So we have been supportive of the PEG that Mayor Adams put out as a first step. For some folks, it may seem early, but the key point is to get out in front of this and start making the smart choices now rather than waiting until you're sort of needing to cut very quickly, so that you can be targeted in where you reduce spending so that you increase efficiency without reducing critical services.
Got it. And the PEG being, just so that it's clear, that the PEG is being the 4% cut that that the mayor asked for just a couple weeks ago. Is that right, Anna?
Yes. Yeah. So he asked agencies to identify 3% this year and 4.75% next year of their city funded spending.
Got it. And so and if anyone else wants to add to that, as well as to what you're seeing and the different data points that you're looking at, one of the big premises of this discussion was knowing, there are cuts and ahead, and how can the city balance this austerity that they are trying to get ahead of before it becomes dire, without compromising services and without compromising, an equitable recovery for all. Not to try to go to last administration's big thing, but for real, how do you balance that austerity without compromising what's been achieved so far in terms of equity? And I know we'll touch on that a little kind of in the next second question or so. So anyone want to take that on, or Ken, I with BENYC, what are you seeing in terms of why it was all created was to increase the number of Black-owned businesses in the city. So how, knowing we've got this huge initiative, how do we continue to create an inclusive recovery?
Hi, Valerie. That's a great question. And first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me in this panel and thank my co-panelists for this conversation this evening. I think I'm going to learn a lot from speaking with you from the perspectives you come from, and hopefully shed a little bit of light on what we're seeing at the city, and kind of, the importance, I think, of keeping a focus on the issue of the city's economic recovery and ensuring not to borrow from the current presidential administration's language, but to ensuring that we build back better in terms of making sure that equity is really a centerpiece, not an add-on, but a centerpiece for the economic recovery. So a really quick overview. The Black Entrepreneurs NYC initiative, BNYC, was established in 2019, and the real focus of this initiative is to try to address some of the structural challenges that have contributed to the racial wealth gap in the United States and in New York City in particular. How can we help close that gap through facilitating and encouraging and supporting business ownership and entrepreneurship in the Black community? So we really have rooted all of our work on some initial research that we did that went into a report that we issued called Advancing Black Entrepreneurship in New York City in August of 2020. And I should say it is up for an upgrade in terms of kind of a refresh in terms of the state of affairs today. But I think that what we saw in that report is really telling. If you think about layering on the impact of a global pandemic on the numbers and the issues that we have identified as structural issues, going into this economic recovery, it just underscores the need to keep a focus on equity in all of these conversations. But really the fundamental piece of information that we have been trying to address is the fact that 22% of New Yorkers identify as Black. However, I think basically according to a lot of our reports, I'd even say to be most generous, the recent census indicated that only about 7% of firms in New York City are Black owned. And so we understand the reality, we understand the contribution that business ownership has in terms of being able to generate wealth. We understand what that is and why it's important to encourage people who are trying to start businesses, to provide them with the tools such as access to capital at reasonable rates, access to professional networks and formal and informal mentorship where it's possible, to create businesses that stay up and continue to employ, continue to provide services in our communities. And we understand as well that this is not just an issue that impacts the Black community, but it is one which really impacts all of us as New Yorkers. When we talk about the unemployment rate for the city and what that means for some of the issues that stem from unemployment, such as mental health and crime and things of that sort. These are not issues that are isolated or located in one community or another. They impact us all. And so we think it's incredibly important in these times. And the Adams administration and SBS Commissioner Kevin D. Kim also agree and really have been champions for this, is that we need to keep a focus on equity in this economic recovery. So what that means is continuing to support initiatives like BNYC, continuing to think about, even in the midst of budget cuts and the recent PEG that the mayor announced, that we find ways to continue to invest in economic equity. So
Great.
That's really where we are.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. I know we're going to touch a little bit on the unemployment rate, which kind of goes into the next question is, the city has had record growth of private sector jobs, with nearly every sector having gains, yet the city's unemployment rate is 6.6%. Which is towering over the national unemployment rate of 3.7% and the state unemployment rate of 4.7%. And that's from the August seasonally adjusted civilian labor force data from the Department of Labor. So why has New York City's recovery taken longer, and what sort of initiatives exist or need to exist to mitigate this? Why is the recovery happening faster in other parts of the country and other parts of the state?
I'd love to chime in on that if I
Yeah.
can. Hi, I'm Caleb Silver. I'm the editor of Investopedia. I'm so grateful to be a part of this panel. It's really an honor for us. So we track New York City's economic recovery, as you stated, through the New York City Economic Recovery Index. We do that with New York One, and we put those results out once a week. But if you look at this recovery and you go back to the last great financial crisis, New York City's economic recovery also took longer than a lot of other metropolises. The unemployment rate stayed higher here than it did in a lot of other cities, just like it's happening now. And a lot of that reason is where the job losses were. A lot of them were in leisure and hospitality. A lot of them were obviously in the travel related sectors, but a lot of them were also in some of those first line services. So if you think about transportation, if you think about warehousing, even if you think about government jobs, where we lost a fair amount of jobs over the last couple of years, a lot of people don't know that. And in education, that I think impacts the Black and Latino communities, I think, more than other communities. So you saw the steepest job losses in some of those sectors that have the highest concentration of those races, and you saw a lot of recovery in some of those areas, but not a full recovery. So right now we're tracking the New York City recovery at about 75%. And I think if all of you walk around the city like you do on a daily basis, you probably say the same thing without even looking at the numbers. City feels kind of back, but kind of not. And you feel it in the restaurant and hospitality industry in particular, and in some of the service areas. Those are the slowest to come back. But unless and until we get tourism back in full force, and unless and until we get people back in their offices on a full-time basis, not 3 days out of the week, not 2, not 1, you're going to see a lot of these communities take a long time to recover, because with that people coming back to the offices, you get the ecosystem of restaurants and the businesses around those. With people coming into the city, obviously for tourism, you get a lot of dollars into the hotel and restaurant industries. So until they come back, that's what's going to hold the city back from an entire recovery, and hold a lot of these folks back from getting back into the workforce and getting back on the path.
Mhm.
Can I add a little bit? I agree broadly with what Caleb was saying here. I think the US, economy lost fewer jobs, right? New York City, we lived this experience ourselves. The economy was hit harder and faster than nearly everywhere else in the country. We lost in 2 months, 23% of private sector employment compared to 16% for the US. So the US recovery has been really strong. It's added almost 6 million jobs over the past year, and private sector employment is growing at about 4.5% for the country. So this is great news. I think what's lost on the narrative around why is New York City's recovery taking longer? We're actually closing the gap, right? Our private employment is growing around 8% a year. So we are making headway here on closing that gap. I think it's just we were hit harder and faster, so we have more room to grow. And Caleb, I totally agree. What we see in terms of what sectors have been hit the hardest, it looks completely different than the financial crisis, right? In New York City in the financial crisis, we saw sectors like construction, real estate, finance, suffering large employment losses. And here we're seeing that's the service sector. And we know the service sector workforce has a higher proportion of women workers. It has a higher proportion of BIPOC workers. It has a higher proportion of workers who live in boroughs outside of Manhattan. So we're really seeing somewhat people that are more likely to have lower wages being hit harder by employment loss as well, right? So it's something to keep in mind when we're thinking about how to make the recovery equitable. I think on the bright side, what we are also seeing is last month's increase in the unemployment rate was actually for good reasons, right? We see workers coming back into the labor force. People feel like they might be ready to rejoin for lots of different reasons. And so we're actually feeling fairly positive about the labor market recovery trajectory in New York City.
Great overview. We've got from Melissa from EDC. Andrew, you want to chime in on what are you seeing out of the comptroller's office?
Yeah, to the big job losses, I would add the retail sector, which has had challenges before the pandemic hit. And on the good news, there are some other sectors that are doing pretty well. The information sector, the Googles and the Facebooks, employment is over 10,000 above pre-pandemic levels, and those are really high-paying jobs too. Professional and business services employment is also maybe 5,000 above pre-pandemic levels, and those are also very high-paying jobs. So it doesn't help on the equity side of the recovery, but it helps on the financial side of the recovery to be net up on high paying jobs.
Yeah,
That's always, yeah, go ahead, Anna.
I was just going to add, I mean, that is why when you look at sort of what the forecast or expectation was for tax revenues at the start of the pandemic, it was this big decrease in income taxes and business taxes. And that didn't happen in part because the job losses were concentrated in sectors that do pay lower wages. Finance did well. We had PPP and a lot of intergovernmental aid flowing. So in many ways, the city budget fared well despite having this very dramatic shock. As Melissa was saying, it was faster and deeper in New York City. So I think that's an important thing to note. And I think that's also why, if you go back to the first question, Wall Street performance, despite the city's economy diversifying a lot in recent years, the city still remains significantly dependent on Wall Street for revenues. Those are in fact the highest paying jobs. And so I think as we see that faltering, that is why we're seeing so much risk going forward rather than, so we should be coming out of this and the revenue should be recuperating, but it's kind of a reverse picture this time around.
Got it. That's great. We need Wall Street to save Main Street. And that's sometimes good for the good and the bad.
Worth noting, a lot of Wall Street has moved to Florida, not the place to be today.
That is worth noting. And there economic development, and as you know, in all of your roles and at your organizations, touches nearly every committee and issue area that we deal with, from the transit and all of that, and we'll get into that. Any comment on kind of knowing that unemployment rate of being high and the hope of where there is to go? We've got this new salary transparency law. How do you think that's going to affect the recovery? And if not, I can also move on to the next question as well.
Sorry, how's the unemployment rate going to affect the recovery?
The salary, so it's starting November 1st.
Oh, I got you. The disclosure.
Yeah, is that the salary transparency law, which is definitely an inclusive and equitable measure to increase salary transparency. But also we're going towards, moving towards a tighter budgets and everything. And
I think it's going to anger a lot of workers especially who have been underpaid for years in sectors where they do a lot of hard work. A lot of folks are having to put 2 jobs together right now, even though there's a lot of job availability. People are having to work 1-2 jobs because of inflation, because of rising costs. Maybe a family member was knocked out of the workforce during COVID for one reason or the other. So I think the transparent thing is good on the surface. That said, you know how it is when you see other people's pay and you're working twice as hard or just as hard. I think there's going to be a lot of people upset about that. Will it affect the recovery? I don't think so. It's really a supply and demand issue in New York, and people have a lot of demands, and sometimes those paychecks just don't cut it. A lot of the job growth has been in low-paying jobs, $15 to $20 an hour. You got to put a couple of those jobs together to support a family in this town if you're lucky.
In city government, we've had transparency for a long time, and it helps where you stand, but it does generate some resentment if you're getting shortchanged, particularly if you don't have a lot of leverage.
I mean, this is also something that can help empower workers, right? We know that wage gap exists even in New York City for women workers and BIPOC workers. And part of this is driven by lack of transparency on the part of employers. I think it's also important to be sensitive around how this regulation can be burdensome, right? For small businesses, for low margin businesses. So there are pluses and minuses. I do want to jump back, Caleb. We've looked into the job-to-job flows for New York City to Miami. It's not everyone in finance. We're seeing maybe 5,000 workers overall across all sectors moving from New York City to Miami. And we know there are almost 500,000 finance and real estate workers in the city. So like,
I was talking about the billionaire bosses, but not the rank and file.
If I could add one quick point to this,
maybe the very, very wealthy ones, but we still have plenty of financial sector workers here.
one point I want to add on to the conversation around salary disclosures, the transparency is that, you know, in many cases, and I think Melissa spoke to this, we have groups of people who have been not really aware of the gap, but who are going to have the opportunity to learn about what they should be getting, and they're going to be able to make decisions for themselves, whether it is holding onto that job or those two jobs Caleb was alluding to, or whether it means, you know, kind of turning to invest in themselves and that side gig or that side hustle that they have used to make ends meet and to actually make that their main thing. And so when you do that, and when you look at the kind of the state of entrepreneurship in New York City and across the country, actually, you will see that the fastest growing demographic of entrepreneurs is Black women. And you can look at both of those demographic groups, and you can see that they are doubly, I'd say it's more of a by order of 10 impacted by some of the challenges that have limited the ability of certain people to make an equitable wage in their work. And so some of these people may be more inclined to turn towards starting their own businesses, scaling their own businesses, hopefully over time, and continuing to employ people within their community. So I think that long term, keeping an eye on that ball can have beneficial impacts.
That's a great point.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So return to office, that's kind of been the underlying kind of theme here at everything. You know, a lot of what centers on the city's economy is people in these amazing office buildings that we have. So knowing that return to office is a key economic driver for the city and in this increasingly tight labor market, however, work from home has increased diversity and equity in the workplace. So what's the balance here? You know, what is the, you know, and you know, I think Caleb, you brought that up about, you know, 5 days a week, people back in the office, or you know, what's the balance of work from home and permanent remote work? What is the impact on the commercial office market? What is the impact on specific indicators such as the commuter sales tax revenues? Impact on, I'm kind of just going through so that way you guys can kind of pick one of these. Impact on retail, both existing and speculative, given the city's retail vacancy rate. So, you know, what return to office, go.
I can start. I can tell you that you feel it more in the Midtown area, right? Where a lot of the banks moved in the last 10 to 15 years. You feel it downtown here in the Wall Street area where I'm at right now. Soho, Greenwich Village feels a little bit more alive, especially because the restaurant scene is there. And a lot of folks I don't think, moved out as much from that area. It's still a very hot real estate market there as well. But in the areas that, you know, depend on those high commercial real estate rents, and I'm talking about Midtown, West and East, and downtown here, you feel the emptiness, and you feel that it's like a contagion of, you know, empty storefront, or what used to be a restaurant or even a hotel is gone, turned into something that's maybe a temporary workplace or closed altogether. But then you feel that effect to the other businesses next to it. It's the kind of that, you know, the neighborhood thing going on in some of these areas. So that's where you feel it and you see it, and you can see it in the revenue as well. The real estate market's been hot on a residential level. It always is in New York City, but especially downtown, right? And especially the Upper West and the Upper East as usual, and areas of Brooklyn, it hasn't been universal. So we're getting this uneven recovery like we always get in the city, because things during the pandemic were stressed, you know, to the extremes. The wealthy got wealthier through a better stock market and the housing market, and those that don't have wealth really didn't get a chance to grab onto anything during that time either. So you feel it when you walk around, and you can feel it in the numbers as well.
I mean, our offices are up on 34th Street, so we're in that sort of Midtown district, and you can, I mean, I will tell you, there are definitely more people now than there were a few months ago, but not having, you know, to me, you know, is it 3 days, 4 days? I think the real issue is the folks who are completely remote and aren't coming into the office, and that's affecting not only the city, but also the MTA, which, you know, the city critically relies on for mass transit, and they're, you know, well below what their ridership should be or used to be. So, you know, I think getting the folks back into the office are important. I think the question on retail is interesting, and Andrew alluded to this already. There were challenges in the retail sector that preceded the pandemic, and we had e-commerce already coming around. I think the pandemic accelerated that significantly. People became much more comfortable buying way more stuff online than they used to be. And so I think there's a challenge for, how do you reimagine retail space going forward? Does it become more service delivery, the stuff that you can't purchase online or outsource? But I think this is also where, one of the Adams administration's priorities in terms of reducing red tape can be very helpful. Property taxes are a big impediment to opening businesses in New York City, but so is the amount of time it takes to get your licenses, your permits, et cetera. And so the extent to which we can speed that up and make those processes easier, the more that we can try to bring these sectors back. And this does go to food service, retail, leisure, hospitality. These are the sectors where you have the job losses. You also have the businesses that shut down and maybe aren't reopening so quickly.
That's a great point, Anna. And if I could piggyback on that, I think that we saw over the course of the pandemic that the businesses that were set up to engage in commerce online, to the restaurants that were set up to get orders online and to be able to deliver, as opposed to having people walk by their restaurant and stop in, those are the ones that were poised to survive. And that larger lesson is a much more acute lesson in the case of Black business owners and Black business owners in the retail and the food services industries in particular. We've seen that those businesses that were ready when the pandemic hit, that already had their website up, that already had an online marketing plan and had a significant amount of revenue coming in from that, as opposed to walking in the door, they were poised to survive, and they did survive. Those that were not, when the economy shut down and everyone was forced to stay indoors, couldn't possibly even imagine or dream up revenue. So that's something which continues to be a problem and a challenge, and addressing the technology gap in terms of arming these businesses with the ability, the tools, not just to say stand up a website with 2 hours of support to help you get your website up, but helping to think through how do you use this website to get yourselves in a position to market effectively through social media or otherwise, and then from there thinking through the opportunities that exist from public-private partnerships and figuring out ways that we can kind of help to stand up with an eye on equity some of the businesses in our communities that continue to employ people, and making sure that we're thinking about the long game when we talk about putting in resources. Think of the investment for the long-term gain of our economy and our communities.
And just one quick point, the flip side of the return, the hybrid work and the working from home, is that in some residential districts, especially in the 4 outer boroughs, you're seeing people are there more during the day. And so that's going to contribute to growth in those commercial sectors too. So it's not just a loss in the city. I mean, sometimes it's a shift of the commercial activity from the business districts to other parts of the city where people are living. And so it can be beneficial for those communities on the other hand.
Yeah, you bring up a really great point, Anna and Ken. This idea that, so are we saying that the recovery happening faster in the outer boroughs because of this increased work from home that maybe not be benefiting the Midtown economy of the city, but is benefiting the outer boroughs?
Yeah, there are costs too, though. Like, so we've had like a giant shift, and everyone has spent a lot more time at home and a lot less time in the office. It makes less nice office buildings really hard to rent. It's hard enough to get people into a nice office building, but like a lot of city workers, going to a ratty office building 5 days a week is a lot less appealing. We're all spending a lot more time at home. If you look at rents are way above asking rents in all 5 boroughs, are way above pre-pandemic levels. So we have kind of, the decrease in demand for office space is driving demand in part for residential space. And those rising rents are going to be a problem going forward.
The rising mortgage rates are also pushing first-time potential home buyers into the rental market.
Right.
And
So-
also the demands from companies saying, all right, time to get back to work is bringing people back into the rental market. So all these things are being exacerbated at the same time, making it tough for folks, especially on the fixed income side.
But yeah, there are bright spots, like what Anna says. We are seeing this in the data, right? We are seeing strong business formation in parts of the outer boroughs, in particular in Northwest Brooklyn and in Northwest Queens. So like, there are parts of the city that are specifically lagging too, and they tend to be like closer to Midtown and FiDi. And it's not just restricted to office sector businesses, because as we've all mentioned, the presence of office workers drives economic recovery more broadly, not just in those office sectors.
Thank you, Melissa, for the bright side. I thank you for that perspective. And yeah, there's so much, the office, it affects so much part of the economy. And Melissa, I'd really like for you, you had worked on this, and it's one of the, I've kind of like gone over, different reasons why I kind of sought out each of you as panelists. And for you specifically, it was the childcare piece of the economic recovery. Can you tell us more about that and what you've been doing at EDC around that? And
Sure, thanks. So at EDC, we have an interdepartmental initiative called the Childcare Innovation Lab, where we're working to reframe access to childcare as an economic development issue and an economic recovery issue, not just something that families should have to deal with on their own. We know that access to affordable childcare is something that benefits everyone. It benefits the individual families who are able to access that care. It impacts businesses who are able to keep their workers. And it impacts the citywide economy, right? If we see hundreds of thousands of women dropping out of the labor force and unable to come back, this impacts our tax revenues and our ability, to provide citywide services. But for years, again, we've just treated this as something that families have to figure out on their own. And so part of what we're doing at EDC is we're taking cues from the innovation we're seeing in the FamTech sector to think about how the sector can operate more efficiently and more sustainably. Sort of speaking to something that Ken referenced, a lot of childcare businesses don't have the technical expertise themselves, and they need additional help so that families can find them and see where seats are, and we can make this process more efficient and help these businesses make sure that all of their seats are filled. And we're also working with the private sector, working with employers on helping to identify solutions on where they can start, right? So we created an employer toolkit to give businesses tangible options on how they can think about how to help their workers afford care. And we get it. There's no one size fits all option for businesses when we're thinking about childcare benefits. But even creating a family-friendly culture at work can be a starting point. And then for the city's part, New York City has 2 new tax credits that the Adams administration announced around childcare. One's a business income tax credit and one's a property tax credit. And they're both aimed at creating more childcare seats and expanding access. So we're really thinking, we need everyone involved. The startups, in the tech sector, we need the city to chip in, and we need private sector employers to come to the table too, because it's such a massive problem that impacts hundreds of thousands of families around the city.
thank you for that. I put the copy of the report from May 2021 in the chat for everyone. Yeah, and it's such an important piece of getting a critical part of the workforce back. And as you said, it's all tied to tax revenue, ultimately impacting the city's fiscal health. And it's so critical, yet it's coming at a time when businesses are cutting back. And it'll kind of go into my next 2 questions, but the childcare piece of being able to have someone also start their own business. And Melissa, when you said FamTech, can you just tell us, is that specifically a sector you guys have identified as family tech?
Yeah, tech companies that are thinking about specifically options for care. Some of them are aimed towards helping families find care. Some of them businesses provide care, and it could be childcare, it could be elder care. There's like a wide range of care options, right? We're a little bit more focused on childcare here at EDC. But yeah, it's an emerging subsector of tech that is doing some exciting things, because I mean,
Uh-oh, did we lose Melissa a little bit, or is it on my end?
Yeah, she froze.
Okay. Melissa, we will wait for you to join us back. But if there's any other comments on return to office from the panel, or on sales tax revenue, or anything else dealing with return to office, or the child care piece, chime in. Otherwise, I'll move to the next question.
I had one more optimistic take on hybrid work.
Okay.
You know, pre-COVID, we were kind of maxed out in some respects. You know, housing was very unaffordable. The trains were jammed. Hybrid work gives us a little more growing room. Our transit isn't packed anymore. The max, if you're only coming to the office a few days a week, the kind of practical commuter distance is a lot longer. It's kind of like getting free transit and free housing without having done anything. So it doesn't help in the short run, but maybe it makes our long run employment ceiling a little higher.
Got it. And important to think in the way of like, what are we looking at in the short run, and what are we looking at in the long run, right? As we look at this recovery. So thanks for making that distinction. Melissa, I see you've joined us back. Welcome back. Good to see you again. I don't know if you want to finish your comment on the FamTech or.
Sure. It's just a subsector of the tech sector that's focused on, disrupting sort of the elder care and childcare, all types of care that we know our families struggle to afford. So yeah, we're specifically.
Got it. I'm really glad you brought up elder care, and I know I didn't include anything on that in the questions, but it really goes to 2 points of either seniors aging in place in the city during this recovery, as well as the aging population that millennials and Gen X are having to do the elder care piece. So thanks for bringing that. I just want to bring that up into the conversation as an important part of this. I love the work that comes out of the New York City Department of Aging as well. But I can't have a panel with everyone. So maybe I'll do something specific. We'll do something specific on that. But I want to go to the next question, where I kind of just start to do a couple of hot topics. Not quite the lightning round yet, but cannabis, casinos, congestion pricing. Each one of these promises much needed increased revenues for the city and the state. How do you see those affecting the city as a whole, and specifically our neighborhoods such as Greenwich Village, West Village, Meatpacking, Hudson Square, Soho, NoHo, Nolita, Little Italy, and Chinatown?
I mean, you're squarely in the congestion zone. So I mean, well, you can go there. I think that congestion pricing can deliver critical revenue to the MTA, and their capital needs are extensive. And I think what we don't want is a situation, I grew up in the city. I remember riding the trains back in the, maybe not so much in the 80s, but the 90s, and your train being taken out of service for mechanical problems and all of this. Like, you don't want to go back to that. You need to continue to invest in and focus really on state of good repair, and congestion pricing is a critical part of that. I think it also has the benefit to really reduce congestion within the zone, to speed up bus travel times for folks who use the bus and other things. But, there are questions, I guess, for how it affects movement for folks who live in the district. And I think that is a big question for, how do folks respond? Do they switch to transit? Are they not able to go, outside the zone as much as they want? So I think it is, it's, definitely going to have a direct impact that you all know, but I think it does have significant potential benefits. I'll leave casinos and cannabis to someone else.
Okay. Yes, any of the three topics there of how should we be looking at those going into this recovery or in this recovery now?
I got just a note on cannabis, which I think could contribute a lot of tax revenue. If you look at what's happened in other states, I think it'll be probably a couple of years of, aggressive sales and people will get into it. That said, if you talk to a lot of established dispensaries, you'll find that the average spend per customer is right around 20, 25 bucks. And what is that really? Pretty much 2 joints or pre-rolled joints every trip, not $75, $80. Tourists might spend that at first, but the point is it's revenue, but it's slow revenue, and it's not a lot of transactions, and it's a lot of the same customers coming in once or twice a week to spend that $25. It's going to be fine for these businesses for the first couple of years, but I think after a while, the city like California, like Colorado, like a lot of other places where this has happened, will be saturated with that. And I think we'll see a big rise in cannabis sales and then tax revenue from it, and maybe an increase in business and small businesses and hiring. But then I think a slow fade, especially as bigger businesses come in and the city becomes more saturated, a la Starbucks over time. So I think good short-term, long-term, don't think it's the panacea.
I'll piggyback on Caleb. Very good points. And I think, again, to the whole purpose of thinking about where the city can focus on this particular industry, the cannabis industry. As you may know, Mayor Adams on April 20th, 420, it was no coincidence, announced a significant amount of resources to be applied from the executive budget towards the standing up of Cannabis NYC. We were, Commissioner Kim and members of the Department of Small Business Services team were with Mayor Adams at the launch of Cannabis NYC a few weeks ago at Medgar Evers College. There's a real focus on what can the city do to ensure that this industry is stood up, the regulated adult use cannabis industry is stood up in a manner that puts equity really at the forefront. And when you look at the numbers, whether it happens exactly to the T or whether it's falls a little bit short of this, the industry is expected to generate about $1.3 billion in sales in the first full year, and between 19 and 24,000 jobs within 3 years. So in terms of economic impact, there is a significant amount of impact that is anticipated. And it's important given kind of the impact and where it can really benefit the city's equitable economic recovery to figure out specific programs and ways in which the city can make sure to reinvest in those communities that have been disparately impacted by the war on drugs over the past few generations. And so at the Department of Small Business Services, within the next few weeks, there should be an announcement for the founding director of Cannabis NYC, and a big part of that individual's mandate is going to be identifying ways to leverage city government services to identify opportunities to partner with through public-private partnerships, and really to encourage, whether it's through real estate, whether it's through capital, or whether it's through just basic business services, encouraging for whatever economic development happens from that space to be development that is evenly spread and really, to the extent possible, targeting those communities that have been impacted the most.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to move on to my next question unless there's anyone who wants to address any of those. I'm going to go to another C here. So headline and core inflation continue to rise despite the last 3 rate hikes by the Fed. Both consumers and firms are feeling the pinch. However, it's really warm outside and climate change. So how can the city balance much needed climate resiliency initiatives without accumulating increased costs to businesses or decreased access to open space? And I'm keeping that just really broad and general on that one. May have gone too niche. I can always move on to the next question if that's just of no interest to anyone. I was just trying to get some discussion on climate change and just different climate initiatives. I know there's been two different offices established in the city around it, just from as well as zoning for zero carbon, and yet some of those initiatives and implementing those can have different short run costs. So, but I will move on to the next question unless anyone has anything they want to address on that topic. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next one. It's budget season for community boards across the city, and as mandated by the city charter, boards like ours draft a list of both capital and expense budget priorities that we submit to OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, for anyone who does not know. Knowing that the mayor has asked agencies to reduce this year's fiscal 2023 costs or expenses and anticipates additional cuts going into fiscal year 2024. What is the most important for community boards like ours to keep in mind with these requests going into the budget planning season?
I mean, I thought of one ahead of time.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes those of us who watch the city budget will say in sort of shorthand that capital is free and that it's not in an agency's budget. It's not what the peg or the reductions are. And for many years, interest rates were really low and access, it was allowed to, the city was able to do a significant amount of capital. I think, and this does pertains back to the question on climate too. Inflation is driving up the cost of capital projects. Interest rates are driving up borrowing costs. So, you know, the ability of the city to do capital will be more constrained, I think, now than it has been in the past decade. And it's going to be really important to prioritize high impact projects so that what you're doing is really going to give you the return on investment. So I think that's one area just to think about, that, you know, you're likely to see less capital flowing. And we already saw it. I mean, it's part of the reason why affordable housing starts in the city are down. It's not the only reason, but that is part of it. The same amount of capital money is not going to get you the same number of units as it did before. It's not going to get you the same miles of bike lanes. It's not going to get you, you know, the same playground. So I think that's something to bear in mind, that really, as you think about how you prioritize and what you want to put on that list.
Thank you. If there's no other comments on the budget or budgeting, I'm going to go into our lightning round. We're holding pretty steady to our schedule. So I'm just going to go. I'm going to go through these questions and just asking for a short answer. I'll probably do two of them. What are 1 to 2 economic indicators that we should be looking at, and why? Whether that's unemployment rate for the city or just kind of different, you know, each of you in your roles look at different economic indicators, some more than others perhaps. But what is it, what's the 1 or 2 that you would say that's what I would keep my eye on going into this, going into the fourth quarter and first half of 2023?
I mean, I think one is MTA ridership levels.
If I can add to that, I would say that watch the MetroCard swipes, but also the TSA entries, travelers coming in and out of Manhattan. That's a big deal. And you can look at that on an almost daily basis, but also the bridge and tunnel traffic as well, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that combination of transportation indicators that tell you who's moving around within, who's coming in from outside, and who's flying in from outside to spend some money here.
Great. Yeah, the tourism piece was mentioned a little bit earlier as well. So thanks for bringing that kind of all together as how that affects.
I actually was just going to say the same about tourism dollars, and that's captured by transportation. But really, when you talk about the sectors that are being impacted by tourism, you're really talking about, retail, you're talking about hotels, you're talking about food and beverage. And as one of my co-panelists mentioned earlier, you see a lot of businesses in those sectors that are located in BIPOC communities. So when you're talking about, what is a kind of a low lift, way to impact the economy across these different communities, I think, paying close attention to whether those tourism dollars are coming in as they were pre-pandemic, because automatically you'll know that some of these communities, the BIPOC communities, will be benefiting if they are.
I have one. As the economy, there's a risk of recession ahead. Some of the tech companies have started cutting back. Keep an eye out to see if those Facebook job cuts and those Google job cuts happen here, or if they happen someplace else. It'll give an indicator of where we are in the pecking order among the tech hubs and a really high wage sector of the economy.
That's a great point, but keep in mind that a lot of the the higher paying, more executive level jobs are the ones that are here versus the warehousing jobs, which are out in Jersey, which are out in Long Island, which are out in Pennsylvania, full of warehouses. So great point, but that's a great one to watch as well.
And then
I
we're keeping an
actually-
eye on, sorry.
Oh, go.
real
You have
estate-
to go first.
Real estate conditions. So retail and office vacancy. I know there was some comments in the chat about this. We look at CoStar data the most. It's telling me that the city's stabilizing. Vacancies seem to be stabilizing. The city is not in full-on crisis mode when we think about where we are on retail and office vacancy. There are pockets of weakness at a neighborhood level that we can be aware of, but like overall, I'm not that worried about like elevated retail and office vacancy at a city.
What's the data set you look at? I'm sorry.
CoStar.
One piece that I like to analyze is the state comptroller issues taxable sales by county, by industry group. So you can see where the sales are happening, and you can see there how depressed food service sales, which are taxable, still are and are a big part of the sales tax revenue. You can see the shift to e-commerce. You'll see the hotels coming back when you start seeing the sales tax on those. So it actually is a really good indicator on like what parts of the economy are pumping.
That's great. That's a great point. We started kind of doing our own investigation of the fast delivery grocery apps before the legislation was introduced by city council, and so that's a great indicator, and that's a great oh, these are all great data sets. I think I got everyone, and if I didn't, I think I did. Really quickly before I go to my next lightning round question and before we open up the floor, I kind of want to summarize like two questions from the audience about the work from home, about the return to office, and about kind of these large spaces being vacant, especially in someone had put in Soho, Pete had put in Soho, a large publishing company, the building with, and that's 800 people that are not going out and buying lunch. As we all know, everyone's consumption is somebody else's income. And then Roy Ruiz, who's from Assemblymember Deborah Glick's office, I'd also asked, like, how do we incentivize companies to come back to the office, and if they're not coming back, how are we how are we setting ourselves up to reinvent the city's economy? So it's kind of a big lightning round question, but I wanted to kind of get it in there really quickly before I went to the last lightning round question. So any comments on incentives to get people back in the office, or how do we adaptive reuse these spaces?
Food and booze always helps. And we have a couple thousand people at our offices here in New York. Some days, Wednesdays, it feels like everybody's here. But we have, we do happy hours, we do events with our some of our publishing partners here, client events. So especially for sales folks, who are out trying to get meetings, we try to make this a place for them to gather with clients. and make it hospitable. Not every company can do that. I'm completely aware of that. But we've had to, because we have a young workforce as well, come up with different things to bring them in, whether it's because it's for a business purpose or just to celebrate with their team, and starting to work more and more. And we're starting to feel, without having to lay down the law very explicitly, we're starting to see a lot more people come in. That's us. We're in a different position than a lot of other companies. And we have a lot of people and a lot of space, but that's what's happening, at least in companies like mine.
That's great to hear, Caleb. You're gonna have to send me the address, Investopedia, so we can figure out a way to plug in. Yes. So I'm at the city of New York, and we, have had a 5-day week policy. Everyone, city employees, there is no telecommuting. What I do think would be good would be to, it's not a policy statement with respect to the city of New York, but I do think overall business in New York, it's what will incentivize people coming back to the office is having a climate of normalizing flexibility, right? We've all been able to learn over the course of the pandemic that people have full, wholesome lives, sometimes overwhelming with respect to childcare or taking care of elders and other activities, but kind of normalizing humanity and being flexible. And having a climate in which senior leadership actually says, we actually encourage you to be a full rounded human being. And I think that will give people that sense of ownership, that sense of agency, and really the desire to spend more time with people who respect them as full, well-rounded human beings.
Great point.
I think one thing, especially for community board 2 has tons of neighborhoods that have their own unique character. And what workers are also really excited about is what's going on the street level, right? What's happening in the public realm. So there's a role to play for business improvement districts to think, what are we doing in our neighborhood to make it great and vibrant and make people want to come back and spend time in this neighborhood, not just in this office.
I mean, I think we can see from the data that folks are not so much afraid of getting COVID at this point. They're out there going to parties and Broadway shows. I think there's a convenience to being able to work from home, but I think that I don't know what to do. But I think one thing that, especially for commuters coming into the city from outside the city, from the suburbs, is tackling both the perceived and actual issues of safety and cleanliness. And I think, and in some ways the perception of safety or lack of safety is probably more of a challenge as someone who comes in and out of Penn Station every day. It makes a difference for whether or not people want to come in. And it's also, got to have a well-running system. If your commute's a reliable 40 minutes, that's one thing. If it's 40 minutes one day, an hour and a half the next, that's a difficult thing. So
if it's 40 minutes and $40, that's also something to think about. Asking people to spend $200 a week. We used to do it. Now it just seems like a harder ask, right?
Right. At a time when costs are increasing everywhere. Great point.
That perception of safety matters more than actual safety on the tourism front too. We're getting an awful lot of bad press around the country.
Thanks.
Yeah, the public safety piece, and to your point, Andrew, the perception of all of that. And Anna, you also made a point about the perception of, and I initially thought you were meaning the perception of safety, within an office or within, in terms of air purification and that type of thing. But I think I may have misread that. I'm going to go to the last 2 lightning round questions. You can answer either one of them. Either what is one thing no one is talking about right now that they should be, or what is one question we should all be asking ourselves right now as we are heading into 2023.
I'm going to say declining school enrollment. I think that's a big issue for New York City, and what may be the factors driving that and what that portends for long-term recovery.
Thank you for bringing the education piece into it. Again, there's so much that the economic recovery covers. Everything affects it. And so I'm really glad you brought that up, Anna. Thank you for that.
It's a great point. I'm going to just add on to that, because keeping teachers engaged, keeping teachers coming in, their job's never been harder. It was hard the last couple of years. It feels like it got even harder for them. So teacher engagement and keeping them coming back in, it's not something you're going to see in the economic recovery index. It's not something you're going to see in the comptroller's report, but that's the front line right there. And I can tell you from principals and superintendents I talk to, it's all they can do to get their teachers to come in and make it through the day.
And the retention of that talent, as well as people are leaving that for perhaps higher paying tech jobs. That's great. Thank you. Well, so with that, I won't grasp at straws there. Are there any, if each of the panelists would like, if there's anything that I didn't bring up that you want to bring up really quickly, or any quick points you want to make, I am going to open up the floor. While you're thinking about that, I am going to open up the floor to the committee and to board members. So I will quickly introduce as the questions are asked. I see I've got 4 hands. So I will introduce the 4 with their hands up. And before that, let me quickly introduce who you have on here. So you've got the Community Board 2 First Vice Chair, Susan Kent is on here. And then I've got a lot of hands. This is great. Great, guys. And I've got Akila. I'm just announcing who doesn't have their camera on first, and then I will go to who has their camera on, and then the hands. Akila, as Ryder has his camera on now, and so does Akila. Those are both community board members, and Ryder is a member of the Economic Development Small Business Committee. Akila is a committee member as well. I've got Donna Raftery, who's our SLA co-chair. That's the state liquor licenses. As everyone knows, we have the highest number of liquor licenses in the city. I've got Mills, John Mills Pierre III, who is on our committee and is also a local business owner, both in this district as well as in Brooklyn. And I've got David Gruber, past CB2 chair, who is on here, also a member of the committee. And I thought I had another past chair on here. Oh, and I've got Carter Booth, who is immediate past CB2 chair. So now that I think I've made all of the introductions, yes, I'm going to go to the hands. So you've got Janet Liff here, who is a member of the committee. Janet, what's your question?
Thank you. So when I just identify, I work in commercial leasing, office leasing, and just saw a report this morning from CBRE. Vacancy rates are 18-20%. Net effective rents are like 30% off of asking. And the velocity of deals is something like 50% of what it was 2 years ago. So it's pretty bleak in this world, and landlords are just, yeah. So I'm glad that you all are more optimistic, because the brokers are kind of not that optimistic. So I have 2 questions related to that. One is, I'm assuming that, commercial real estate, that the taxes really support this city. So is the city prepared for that, the hit it might have to take this coming year on that? And then one of you mentioned that we have to, cut red tape and move things along. So obviously, with this amount of vacancy and having a housing crisis, we really need to loosen up zoning and accelerate changes in zoning and more creative uses of our existing infrastructure. So is that in the works to make, rezoning property easier? So those are my 2 questions.
So if I can jump in on both, I've done a lot of work personally on the New York City property tax, which you're right is about half of the tax revenue, about a third of all the revenue in the city, and much of it comes from commercial real estate. The city did see a year-to-year decline last year. The market values, according to finance, have rebounded. So I think the concern over the long haul, and the forecast is the city is assuming very slow growth in property tax revenues, because they're really concerned about this. And it's going to take multiple years, because, as you know, you've got long-term leases and and companies, I think, are trying to figure out how they're going to respond over the long haul. I think there's also a bifurcation that Andrew alluded to. you've got sort of trophy buildings, Class A office space, new space, that's, doing much better. I think the issue is for someone like me whose office is in the garment district, Class B, Class C, older space is becoming less and less attractive. And those are I think where you need to think about how do you do reuse. On zoning, I would like to, I'm going to put in a pitch for CBC. We had a great panel this morning with the Deputy Mayor for Economic Development, Dan Garodnick from the Planning Commission, some state folks on land use decision-making process and reforms that we had put forward on how to reform it. So if you haven't had have a chance, I'll put the link in to the report that my colleague Sean wrote, which really talks about what to do to reduce sort of the logjam and increase the ability to rezone more quickly and foster growth. And then the panel will be up in a few days on video, so that will be, I'd encourage people to tune in. It was a really great conversation by folks who are committed to addressing some of these issues.
Thank you. Where is, so you'll put the link in the.
I'll put it in the chat if I can. I think that'll be easier, but it's on our website.
And I'll get the link from you, Anna, for the video, for the recording, and I'll send it out to the committee and any other attendees that are interested in that when it's available. Melissa, did you want to add anything to that?
I was just going to say, we do see in the data that we look at lower vacancies in Class B and Class C compared to Class A. So we are seeing high leasing activity in the trophy class. This is right. Like lots of businesses are taking this opportunity to scale up the quality of space that they have. Great. Class B and Class C serve an important function in our economy, right? 60% of businesses and employees work out of office employees in the city, and office businesses in the city work out of this Class B and Class C office space. So there is room to make investments in these spaces and make them nicer for the workers who work there. We also want to make sure that we keep these spaces relatively affordable so small businesses can continue to rent office space in the city, right? So there's a nice balance. There's a balance that we have to strike with anything that we're considering.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Janet. I've got Robin Rothstein, who is also a member of the Economic Development Committee.
Thanks, Valerie. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Just going back to the tourism piece, I keep reading, I don't claim to be an economist, so I hope people can fill me in, but I keep reading about how the US dollar is really super strong, which on the face sounds really great, but apparently it's not great as far as it's affecting foreign markets. And I wonder if you have any projections about how that it will impact tourism from foreign countries, since the dollar is so strong in their markets. I think I read that the dollar is the strongest against the euro than it has been in 20 years, and the pound probably similarly in Asian currencies. So we get a lot of. I used to work in the Broadway sector for many years, and we had a very big Asian tourism groups coming and whatnot. So I'm wondering if you have any projections about what a strong dollar would mean to foreign tourism coming to New York City.
Yeah, I'm not an economist, but I play one on TV, and I can tell you that it is a factor. And the dollar is as strong as it's ever been against most major currencies. You don't see a lot of Japanese tourism here. The yen is at its weakest level against the dollar in decades, if not ever. So you have that, and that is definitely a factor. That said, walk around Broadway. There's still a lot of foreign tourists walking around today. Will that continue going forward over the next few months? Inflation's only getting worse, and the European economy is having a lot of issues. The Chinese economy, mysterious, and also very tough to travel these days. But also, that's going to be a factor. I think that said, people that want to come to New York, come to New York, and people do it all the time. We just haven't had the full influx of tourists back. But certainly a stronger dollar is going to make it more difficult and more challenging over the next few months. And I don't see a path to a less strong dollar, given the fact that the Fed is raising interest rates and a lot of investors have been running for cover to the dollar. So I think that's going to be certainly a mitigating factor going forward as well.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for that question, Robin. That was a great question. You could play an economist, I think, and you would do really well. I'm going to go next to Will Banesh, who is our Quality of Life Chair and is also leading the board's climate initiatives.
Thanks, Valerie, and thanks for allowing me to ask a question, and thanks to all the panelists as well. I just wanted to ask if anyone had a view on the environment going forward for our storefront businesses, whether retail or restaurants. What's sort of the trajectory of rents there? I imagine the story is hopefully not as bad as for market rate residential rents. But is that a rising cost that's going to make it more difficult for, you know, the small business owners occupying storefronts? And then in terms of other factors like congestion pricing, how much will that not impact the businesses operating out of those storefronts? So just curious to hear kind of the cost perspective, I guess, going forward for these types of businesses.
So I can speak to what we're seeing in retail rents. In the CBDs, they're down roughly 15% compared to pre-COVID on a per square foot basis. You know, what we're talking about extends to all kinds of storefront businesses, not just pure retail ones. But again, like, to what extent, like retail, which is a low margin business, you know, sector in general, and how comfortable the businesses feel signing leases when there's a heightened amount of uncertainty in the outlook is a risk that we're just looking at right now.
Great, thanks for that, Melissa. And thanks for your question, Will. I'm gonna go next to Michael Levine, who's a CB2 board member.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you to the panelists. This was an excellent discussion. I'm speaking not just as a member of the board of CB2, but as a member of the board of the Village Alliance Business Improvement District. I heard one of our panelists say that there is a role that bids can play in encouraging a faster recovery for the retail sector. As we all know, business improvement districts have as their primary goals safety and security in the area, cleanliness, and marketing. I'm curious to know if any of you can answer this question. Is there anything else we in the business improvement districts, and we have many in CB2, is there anything else the business improvement districts can do to encourage a faster recovery of storefront retail uses? I don't know if there's an answer to this question. I'll be curious to know if anyone can think about it.
So I'll take a stab. I mean, what you just described in terms of the roles of bids and improving like the reality of cleanliness and safety is a huge part of what we will see like driving storefront recovery in the city. So doubling down on that, great. I think also, you know, if we can be like innovative and creative, like how can we, you know, for example, Queens has like a night market, which is really popular in driving, you know, activity in those locations. Are there different types of unique programming that you think like meet the moment in terms of like low cost, but creative ways to drive, you know, new customers to your existing storefronts and perhaps like extended hours to what you were doing before? So.
Thank you.
I mean, I will say I've also seen around Midtown and other places when we've walked, you know, there sometimes it seems like people are having dance classes or they're ping pong tables. Like there's also, you know, generating that activity on the street that brings people out, allows some, you know, interaction, can increase the foot traffic that then helps support the businesses. And so those might be other creative ideas, though as we go into colder season, maybe that's more challenging. But
so what you're saying is that our bids should be as creative as possible in creating marketing opportunities for our storefront retail uses. Thank you for your answers.
And I would say one more, Michael, which is just continue to do what bids such as yours do, which is helping to communicate information on programs, new opportunities that are provided through city government, and being, you know, a vital partner in getting the word out about programs such as NYC Best, which is aimed at trying to help small businesses cut through regulatory red tape, operate more efficiently, kind of, you know, in dealing with government, and, you know, programs such as, you know, Black Entrepreneurs NYC, for example. We're reaching out to bids and to community-based organizations to tell them about the Black Business Directory that we're establishing online, to make sure that we're providing opportunities for those businesses throughout the city to make themselves known. And so those types of partnerships, continuing to work with city government and communicating information, we think bids are tremendously valuable in getting that information to your constituents.
Thank you. Thank you.
And download the Village Alliance Access app. There's great incentives. I've definitely used it at CO Bigelow. That's my push. Thank you, Michael. Kristen Shea, who is also a member of the Economic Development Committee.
Hi, I echo the thanks to the panelists. Sorry, I didn't realize it was going to be such a backlight to me, but I just want to echo the thanks to the panelists, and that I also echo that this was a really great, interesting, robust discussion. I do have a couple of questions, one surrounding the return to work, and the second about the safety issue. Why don't we start with the safety question? So with budget cuts, my understanding is the cuts are being made across the board, across every agency, including NYPD. And so I want to, which of course, safety is such an important part of an economic recovery, because residents can feel safe going out. Stores aren't losing money to thefts. When I go to a CVS now, everything is locked up, and you can't even, buy a bag of peanuts without getting a store clerk to come in and pull it off unlock it for you. And then also tourists coming back into the city. So I just wanted to get a better understanding of how you think maybe, that's going to impact the economic recovery, and how we would be able to support NYPD in protecting us while also remaining safe when not having the budget they need to perform their jobs. Or if there is a way that you see as a plan that they can be supported to better create safety in our community.
I mean, as the person who supports the PEG, I'm happy to take this one on. The direction to agencies was no layoffs, no reductions to services. You are really looking for opportunities to increase efficiency and do things better. And I think every agency can find some of those types of savings. I think if we all look at our own personal budgets, there's probably a little bit we can trim here and there to not waste as much. So I think the goal is to do that without, no one's put on the table reducing the NYPD, the uniform force or anything like that. So I think those options exist. I think, the mayor has put some specific pieces there. He's talked about civilianization. There are a number of positions in the NYPD that could be filled with a civilian at a much lower cost, that are filled with uniformed officers. And so that's one way to A, get those officers back out on the street, and B, reduce your costs on those services. The civilianization has been a sort of a perennial issue at the NYPD, but this is one thing that the mayor is really pushing, that, for example, could reduce the cost without impacting the ability to provide the services. And so, I think it is possible. I will say, Mayor de Blasio was very much an investment, and all spending is good. And the city budget grew $27 billion under his watch. And for many years, agencies really haven't been asked to take that close a look at their spending. And not saying that people are wasteful. I'm not saying that the city isn't doing excellent work and being innovative. They are. But the ability to look at your operations and say, hey, could I do this better? We've got all of this virtual stuff. Are there things I could do virtually that I used to have someone come into the office and stand in line and talk to a person? So that's the idea, to try to figure out how to leverage technology so that we're not reducing services, but we are using taxpayer resources wisely.
Great.
So that's my PEG pitch. Thank you.
Kristen, thanks for the question. I don't know if any of the panelists have any other response to that, but thank you.
Oh, no, I would just say, to add on to Anna's point there, is that, obviously the PEG is across the board, all city government agencies. So it's not just the NYPD, but it's other agencies that do provide very valuable services, which contribute to the safety of all of us and the security of all of us. And so I think it's important to just kind of keep in mind, while the illustration, the kind of the demonstration of safety and security, visible security in the form of an NYPD police officer is very important for some of the economic recovery we're speaking to. We should also be aware of, the vital city government services, including, health and hospitals and, children services and the small business services all the way down the line that contribute to our overall safety and well-being.
I think that's a great point. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Ken. And again, that mental health piece really being at the core of a lot of this. So thanks for bringing that back into the conversation. Thank you, Kristen, for your question. I'm going to go to our last question from the committee and from the board.
Sorry, I have one more question, and I'll try to make it quick. Okay. So if it's okay.
Sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's surrounding return to work. I just, again, thank you for your comments on it. But I think it's just such a complex, we all know that it's a complex issue, but I wonder, there's a lot of discussion about people going, to lunch and commutes and office space, which are all very important components of economic recovery. But I also wonder if there's any calculation in this about quality of life and productivity, which a flexible schedule allows. For example, I used to work for the city. I no longer, I'm in private sector. It wasn't hard to woo me away, especially because I do have a lot of flexibility. And when I had to commute to work, a 45-minute commute meant 7.5 hours a day commuting instead of either working or spending that time with my family or just doing healthy things. And also the office itself was just not very conducive to productivity. It was loud, it was dark, a lot of people coming in sick. So people were out quite often sick, which I don't see in quite as much in the private sector. So I just wanted to understand if sort of in these discussions, and I think this goes a lot to the folks who maybe work for the city, how you're calculating those other two pieces, the quality of life, the way that an employee who has some flexibility, feels good, works better, is healthier, and has a better space to work and can produce better work in their jobs. So I just kind of wanted to understand sort of how that's maybe being part of this calculation, or is it being, or is this part of the calculation?
Kristen, can I ask what agency you were at previously in the city?
Sure, Mox.
Okay, great. That's just for my being nosy and curious. I have a lot of colleagues across the city, and each agency has a different culture, as you know, Kristen. So look, the people who are making these calculations and these decisions are way above my pay grade. So I can't say anything official about what the city of New York or the Department of Small Business Services is doing. But I would say that, personally, as a New Yorker, as somebody who's working, I do benefit from, and I do appreciate the level of flexibility when it is allowed, under very rare circumstances. But, I've found that even in the midst of, what we're dealing with and having to be at the office 5 days a week, that our commissioner, Kevin D. Kim, and senior leadership is definitely considerate of some of these challenges that we all face, and really mindful of trying to be flexible where possible. I definitely, as I mentioned in my comments, I think that normalizing a level of flexibility is really important to overall morale and well-being, and really wanting to get up and come into the office, because you know that people are thinking about your overall well-being. So if I had the ability to do that, I would put that into action right away. But I do know that the policies vary from agency to agency, but there is a real consideration of the fact that in the midst of all of this in the private sector, city government losing employees because of, in some cases, that lack of flexibility for hybrid schedule, that we need to take this concern much more seriously.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Kristen. If there's anything else anyone else from the panel wants to add to that, if not, I will move on to the last question from Carter Booth, who is a former, most immediate former CB2 chair.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. We've watched, and I'm sure all of you watching New York City, we've watched seasons slip away now for quite a while. You can just watch 3 months just go, because we've all been waiting for something to happen. And I think that we're all kind of recognizing that, that waiting for something to happen is not the way it's going to play out. And I also don't hear as much from leadership in the city in acceptance of work from home, just sort of touching on what Kristen said. And the lead time for commercial office space and even retail holding on to it, my concern is if there's a big change in the city that people will start releasing space, because there's about a year lead to get space built up, and nobody wants to go through that. So everybody's been waiting for work from home to end. But I think the realization is it's maybe a few days in the office for many industries. And so, as we go through the next year or two, and particularly if there's some belt tightening, are we going to see a release without anybody picking up space? And is that going to compound the problems? And, and it's really highlighted by the chat earlier about, the publishing company, which anybody on the board knows who that is, but there's just nobody there, and they've still got this big building. And so that's a concern to me. I wouldn't really quite understand this if it wasn't watching time slip away for so long and seasons slipping away. And so that's just a question for anybody. Any thoughts on that?
I think a lot of what we're hearing is that not necessarily companies want to reduce their footprints. It's maybe just that the old structure of how an office was set up with desks for every person is not realistic going forward, right? So it's not necessarily, maybe we just see different types of space and demand. So more conference and hot desking situations. I know at where I work, it's really hard to get a conference room because when people are all in the office together, they are really excited to work together. So it would be interesting to see how this plays out, whether individual tenants will choose to redo their spaces to fit the new normal for how we work together, or whether if there are certain buildings where we will just see high structural levels of vacancy, in which case there is a role for the city to play there, right? But overall, I think we are not hearing that corporates are ready to bolt at any second. And I think a big reason why is we have a very diverse and talented workforce, right? That these companies still want access to. So it sort of remains to be seen. We're watching these dynamics. But yeah, I'm not particularly hearing, or we're not hearing that companies are looking to mass release their office space back onto the market.
Yeah, and someone had put in the chat, about, will this contraction in office space affect the DOE, enrollment? And that's a pretty big question. So I don't know if anyone wants to address that or not.
It talks about, I think they're asking about revenues. DOE doesn't have a dedicated revenue stream from city taxes. It's an allocation of the general fund, which is all of the taxes. So, a lot of it is, if there is a reduction in revenue above what is projected, what are the choices that the city will make about how to allocate that across the different agencies?
Got it. Thank you for that. And thank you, Carter, for your question. With that, I'm going to close the floor and thank each of the panelists for your time for this discussion. This will go on our website. We will send it out. And I know there is some follow-up from Anna that I will get to the committee. So thanks to each of you for your time this evening and leading up to the panel. I really appreciate. I think I emailed all of you cold. So thank you for trusting your time and thoughts with our group. And as I said, it'll be posted online as well, and I'll send that through. So thank you very much.
Thanks for including me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for including me, Valerie. Great to speak with you all.
Thank you. Thank you all. We're going to move into the second part of our evening. We're just a little bit off schedule, but I wanted to make sure that everyone got their questions answered. So we'll move into the second part of our agenda, which is a discussion of the CB2. Also, any general, I'll open the floor before we get into the budget talk. If there's any general comments the committee or board members that are on want to make about the what we just heard, and then I'll move into the budget portion and see if there's anyone from the public that wants to testify about the budget, and we'll go into our general discussion. So, we heard a lot. It was a lot of big macro and a little bit of what's happening in our area as well. So I hope that everyone found it productive and interesting. Janet, call on you.
So I just think sort of self-reflection that, when they talk about red tape and difficulty opening business and running business, that there's like an inherent conflict within the community board, because we generally, I'd say we're not particularly pro-business as a community board. Like, we don't make anybody's life easy. So I don't know what we can do with that, but I think it's something that we have to recognize. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm seeing some nods for Mills, who definitely has had firsthand experience. Any other comments on that? I will say that there is, as you know, the mayor, a few months ago, I think I sent out to the committee, had come up with his economic recovery plan, the economic recovery plan blueprint, I think it was. And his big phrase, this is by no means I was going to bring this up earlier during the panel, but I thought I would just talk about it during our meeting. And when it was just us, was about the mayor's big City of Yes initiative. This being a City of Yes, which really is around businesses. So I know that there are 3 zoning proposals that are on the table. One is zoning for zero carbon, zoning for economic opportunity, which is to your point, Janet, and then zoning for housing opportunity. Those proposals will start being discussed in a public forum by the city and Department of City Planning in the early part of 2023. I can put a link in the chat in just a second. I will put it specifically to the City of Yes economic opportunity, because I think there are different items in there about removing unnecessary type of limitations on what type of businesses are allowed in commercial districts, supporting the reuse of existing buildings, and there's also one that's removing dancing restrictions in zoning. But I won't belabor everyone with what each of those are, but I did put a link in the chat for everyone. So that whole initiative is really about supporting the commercial corridors and entrepreneurs throughout the city and reducing retail vacancy, which I'm sure there are lots of commentary around that. So any other thoughts on what we heard this evening? All right, Carter.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something that Kristen touched on a little bit. Because the city and state are having so many problems filling job vacancies, there's a lack of movement across many, many city agencies. And that's really where the real delays are happening consistently. And it's something that, I think just Kristen just hit a lot of the points on that. And it's something that we really need to remind people of, even so that people may go seek those jobs who may not have otherwise, because just not having bodies to do things, to review things, to process things is incredibly important. And Kristen, I did not know about your recent change, so I know you're probably much happier. But you know, it's you know, I know that you were reviewing a lot of things, and with staff shortages, it's not happening, right? And so just the wheels aren't moving, and with budget cuts, I don't know how that all factors together, but that's really a big issue, I think. And I just wanted to bring that up, and it's maybe something to consider in budget priorities, is just a campaign for the city as a whole to reach out so that there are applicants to fill positions.
I have 2 comments on that. I know the city has a very high staffing vacancy rate for city jobs, and I think one of the panelists may have alluded to that. It's 5 times higher than it was in 2020. So there, and as Kristen being an example, is left for a much more lucrative, that's me putting the polish on that, much more lucrative position with more flexibility. So that is definitely a factor. I know that there was an article or a blog post of some sort talking about the huge vacancies that DOT has open in their org, and also very senior level positions, which means not only are there not people on the worker level, but also the leadership is not there to lead who is there. And you know, I'm whether that's, you know, open restaurant inspections or other important initiatives such as increasing bike lanes, you know, that's just one agency that's I think it even has like really complex org chart. If anyone's interested, I can send you the link. So that is definitely a good frame for everyone in all of our different committees when thinking about what to propose for budget and thinking of capital and expense. So thank you for that, Carter, and thank you, Kristen, for sharing your news. Thank you, Ryder. Yes, thank you for that. Even though there is salary transparency in the city government jobs, Ryder had just put in the chat, and I'll share it to everyone, about the city agencies in Gotham as city agencies struggling to fill thousands of open jobs. And it's not just happening at the city level, we're also seeing it at the state level. We heard from the State Liquor Authority that you know, they are trying to double their staff, and they are having a very hard time finding people to fill those roles right now. So and that affects a lot of the work that we do as well. So so with that, if there are any additional comments, feel free to chime in on what we heard. I really thank everyone that's here for participating in the discussion, asking such fantastic questions to the panelists. I'm going to quickly go to budget priorities. I didn't really do a slide deck on it. We had proposed a couple of things last year. I think we supported like an increase in funding for the Black Entrepreneurs NYC out of SBS. And that was also joint with the Equity, Race, and Justice Group committee. We had talked about possibly doing, asking for increased funding for Chinatown, but I believe that it was because of the LMI and the census data, and that we ended up tabling that because there was a big grant coming, which it did come from the state, a $20 million grant with workshops and all of that did get that funding through. And then possibly talked about ADA accessibility and the different litigation that's been happening for small businesses in our district, whether it's retail or a deli or a restaurant, and the really egregious lawsuits that end up not solving anything, and that education piece perhaps from the city on how to help these businesses that get predatory litigation. So those are just a couple that were on the top of my mind. I'd be open to hear what if people have any ideas or want to talk about any of those. I know I've done a lot of talking, so I want to make sure that the floor is open for people to talk about those. Before I get to Michael, I also quickly mentioned kind of in a long-term thing for us to think about, whether it's in this budget, whether it's a priority that we want to prioritize, or whether it's something we work on separately, is really, I remember last year that Suzanne had put together a proposal for one of the planning fellows on retail vacancy. And I know the borough president's office has a report on that and different things. So, you know, is that something we want to ask for about, you know, different studies that we would want done that could help small businesses, whether that's, you know, some sort of data point that we feel that the district needs or that other districts could benefit from having as well. So that's a lot. I've said a lot. I have no slides or anything for this, but just wanted to open up the discussion. So Michael?
Yes, Valerie, thank you. I'd like to follow up on the discussion we had on the role of bids in our community.
Mm-hmm.
I think we might be able to ask for a special grants from SBS, which has been such a wonderful supporter of the bids, special grants in this time for promotion and marketing activities, which was the answer to the question, what else can the bids do? SBS has in the past provided grants and aid to business improvement districts, particularly in recovery from Superstorm Sandy. Is there something we can ask SBS to do now to provide grants and aid for promotion and marketing of our business improvement districts, which will clearly help the retail sector? Can we include that in our need statement?
Yeah, and that you bring up a great point, Michael, as well. Are there other? I think that's a great idea. Are there other data points or things happening on the macro level here that we want to make sure get into the district needs statement, so that we can either like pull the data or just so we can have a really, so I know that Janine is going to trim it down, but I want to make sure that any sort of economic development issues, you know, Janet, I will reach out to you about office vacancy rates, so we can make sure we get the commercial office story in there about what's happening in the district there. But I don't need an answer right away, but I will need one soon. So if anyone wants to chime in now, that's fine, or you can reach out to me about it. So that is something that we could put on the table. Do we want to ask for small grants for that bids can apply for? You know, I'm going to take the other side of that as well and say, okay, what about businesses that are not in bids, and how do we help them as well? I'm just going to throw that out there. I think I will get to my point in a second. I'll ask Janet to comment.
We should check first. You know, SBS has a lot of grant programs, so they may already have money for that. I know, you speaking of things not in bids, they recently did a push to get more underserved communities to join bids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're pretty bid heavy down here, so I don't know that, you know, unless Bleecker Street wanted to start something. But before we ask for that money, I think maybe we should research what's available.
Sure.
And then our bids are such varying in size and wealth. So that's just something to consider. But on the vacancy, there was legislation passed, right, last year, a couple of years ago. So I think we don't need to add something to that. I mean, the information is supposed to already exist. So the only thing I think we should do is follow up on that.
Right. Is it available? And is it what what is statistically meaningful that we could maybe pull for the district needs statement. Just to, the temperature on what's going on. Great point. Thank you for that.
Right.
Carter?
Yeah, I think that SBS is going to be undergoing a pretty transformative change at the end of this fiscal year because they benefited significantly from a lot of COVID grants. And as a result, when we are asking that money be put towards bids, when they already have their own independent source of funding, that it undermines some of the other SBS programs that are in place. And when we talk about equity of the city's resiliency and recovery, that it's really important to take that into account. You know, we're very fortunate, as probably all of you know, when you walk around and you see that we're probably doing better with the people who the foot traffic, even tourism traffic. You know, we heard you know, from you know, hotel owners, et cetera, that this is the first place that we see recovery. So I'm be a little cautious about jumping in on that. And also the numbers, it's interesting, you know, a number of us on the board sit on as either the community board representatives or as residents on the bids. And what I know in the NoHo bid is there are some surges, like I guess in the last month or 2 months, there have been a lot of commercial signings. So the numbers take a while to catch up. It sort of fits in spurts. But when it happens fast, and then it slows down for a little bit. But those are just some observations. But the big thing is the COVID funding for business is going to be very different, and I think that's just something to consider.
Thanks for that. And I don't think I've sent this out to anyone, but perhaps it's on your radar that there is, you know, the West Village bid. We passed a resolution on, it went through city council, it's official now, but there is now another bid application that we'll be receiving. I don't know the timeline on it. I'm assuming late next year. This the Soho West bid is now officially in the planning phase with SBS. You can see it listed on their website, and I'll share the link with everyone. It's primarily what it is. It's west of Broadway in Soho. So that's coming in the works of trying to come online. That's all I'll say about that. So another agency that I think we forget is a city agency is the Economic Development Corporation. It's a different kind of animal, though. I won't pretend to know what that is, but that's another agency that we can request items from as well. I will. So yeah, the other ones. So it sounds like the bid, maybe asking for more money for bids, is not what the group wants to do. The other ones I think I had brought up were on increased funding. Again, this would come out of SBS, which is, you're right to your point, Carter. I think there was an article a few days ago about the SBS budget was going to significantly be reduced, and not just from the 4% cut because of that federal funding going away. But the idea about education piece with maybe the mayor's office of peoples of disabilities with SBS on the ADA requirement. Basically, what do businesses need to put out? I don't know if you have a place you go to regularly and all of a sudden you notice that they do have the step up, but they, because they are pre-existing non-conforming use, I want to use the incorrect term, but they're able to put, you know, a sign with a phone number and a bell, and that seems to ward off the legislation. So there is a small business owner, I think operator, I think it's Madam X on Houston, that was in the Post recently about the legislation or about the ADA accessibility and being erroneously sued, and that's a stairs down place. I know Carter will correct me if I'm wrong, has stairs that go down. So that is something I and I'm also posing it to the group, either to ask for funding for that education piece, or and as well, to have perhaps a panel, or maybe we invite this operator to come talk about her experience, and maybe her attorney, who's been successful in pursuing one of the most litigious attorneys out there with these lawsuits, basically, where they will go after a small business and say, okay, for 50, you can settle, I'll either go to court, or you can settle for $50,000, and the problem doesn't go away. It just, they're then vulnerable to the next lawyer who comes, the small business is vulnerable to the next lawyer who comes and tries to sue them. So I know I've been talking a lot. So any other thoughts on maybe adding ADA? And I have to word it. I think I had worded it last year. I can look for it and send it through. But otherwise, that's kind of all I had on the budget for SBS or for EDC. While you guys are thinking about it, or if you want to chime in, just raise your hand. If there's anyone from the public that wants to speak on a capital or expense budget item that they would like proposed, feel free to raise your hand at this time as well, and I'll be happy to call on you. Mills?
Hi, everyone. One question I had around the budget is, can we do something with sanitation or sort of private street sweeping? I think in light of what's come out of the earlier discussion, we've been a little more exhausted than other parts of the city, and I don't think we quite have the infrastructure to handle it. The garbage cans are overrun, and with the empty storefronts, I know on West Broadway, they used to, in the 2010s, have a private group that would come and just street sweep for them. I haven't seen them recently, and I don't know if that was through a bid or the like, but that would be worth exploring. And I think it's, while seemingly small, could be a very helpful step for all of us.
That is certainly something that we can ask for. When the way that this works is we'll submit it, I guess we'll submit it to, I'll send something into Janine. Normally it would be the district manager of just our budget parties, and then they're kind of all put in a general, like from the board, they're just put into like either expense or capital, and then at executive committee in October, they'll be ranked and some possibly removed or whatnot. And there's a limit. It's like 40 expense and 25 capital, I think. And so that's certainly something that we can put on there. I'm sure that quality of life will also have a sanitation item as well. So let's like make sure that that we're aligned on that. So I can send through just the list from last year, and I apologize for not doing that sooner. I think Janine had maybe sent out, but I may be wrong. The responses that we got from the agencies last year as well, just for everyone to look at and know. But that's a good suggestion, I think. So oh, Carter put in the chat about a Madam X. Carter, I thought you were putting a confession in the chat, but it's from the New York Post story, because I remember reading it. Ryder thought the same. Anyways, so that has the story there. I can send out the full story to everyone. But I think it's something, so maybe the ADA piece, maybe something on sanitation for increase in Mills. I'll reach out to you for the language. It sounds like those are the two kind of on the table for us. I know that there's other things that kind of touch this committee as well, like as you saw in the discussion that we talked about DOE and all these different things, and I know each committee has their own thing. So, but I think that those will, I guess, be the two that we move forward with. If anyone has any other additional thoughts on that, send it through. And if there's anything you think, I'll send through the district needs statement to everyone as well. And if there's something you feel is not missing from the small business perspective or the economic development piece, let's make sure we get in there. If it's a data point, I can see what I can do to pull the data. So that's great. Thanks for that, Mills. I didn't see anyone from the public who wanted to testify on the budget priorities, so I will close that. Other than that, if there's any other new business, please feel free to raise your hand and ask, bring it up. This is the time to do it. As far as, and I'm just going to keep talking unless there's a hand up to close this out. And thank you everyone for staying. I know we went just a little bit over the time. In terms of programming, I know I had the summer off, and for everyone, as you know, we are remote through October 22nd. I'd really, and because of where our meetings fall at the end of the month, I'd like to do, something in October. And if there's something you feel is not being addressed, like, please reach out to me. And I know that there's a lot of, so I'd like to do something in October. November, we get into that last week right after Thanksgiving. So I will touch base with people and see what their availability is. Again, I want to make sure that we have meaningful programming that's relevant and is answering the questions that we need answers to. So I would like to bring in Amy from Madam X. I think that's interesting in the ADA component. I know that's not as glamorous perhaps as this big state of the New York City economy, but I think it's really important for our small businesses that are continuing to get hit with these lawsuits, just so there's some sort of action items and takeaways, and then also record it so that business owners can watch it on their own time, as well as update it, the information on our website. I know that we initially started talking about the commercial rent regulation. I've spoken with Christopher Marte's office. It's been a few months, but it wasn't on the, there wasn't, thank you for that, Akila. There wasn't movement on it. Sorry for that. There hasn't been movement on it. So it hasn't been made a priority by the speaker. So that's why I've not moved forward with programming around that. I briefly introduced it a few months ago. But I would like to bring in, a couple months ago, or maybe a little over a year ago, we brought in kind of the west side bids to come give an update, and we haven't done that for the east side. So I'd like to do that as well. We likely won't have a meeting in December because it's going to fall if we stay in our cadence of being at the end of the month. So I would say definitely plan on an October meeting. And stay tuned on November. Yes, Akila has in the chat, I'll just read this for everyone. It said there's a long history of Soho and overflowing garbage cans, maybe that we can unpack to get a deeper understanding. And then also, is there protocol to combat these ADA cases? Maybe we can get a lawyer to advise businesses on how to handle them. Exactly, I would like to bring in the lawyer for Madam X was successful and I think it would be great to hear them as a pair. And I've got a list of some other one or two other complimentary speakers that might be Oh, Akila, do you want to speak? I have you in the chat. Okay, maybe she can't.
No, it's just, I mean,
you have
I
experience?
also,
I didn't get
I
that
did.
from that, so tell us.
No, I had an experience too where we received a letter, and it's really common in Soho because of all of we're kind of like grandfathered in with these, you know, old buildings that don't have ADA accessibility. I mean, you can also make the argument for all the apartments that are all walk-ups, you know. There's like a million.
Exactly.
It's not just for stores, it's actually for residential units as well. You know, you have tons of buildings in this neighborhood that are only walk-ups and do not have elevator access. So there's kind of a protocol for dealing with it that could be helpful if businesses don't know. What I did was basically we got a letter saying that we were in violation. And there's actually a people that will walk through the streets. I mean, it's kind of like there's a whole, what happened to us was there was a couple that approached the door and there's a doorman there, but the doorman didn't see them. They walked away, but I happened to be there and I said, oh, would you like to go in? And I opened the door and we have a ramp that they can come up, but then they're like, no, it's fine. But they sent us a letter anyway. And what you can do is we took photos of like every store up and down the block that has the same situation as us. It's a step up. We submitted it with like a legal letter and never heard another word at all. So our lawyer, we had a lawyer. I mean, most businesses have some kind of lawyer to help with certain things that we consulted around this. And we didn't have a terrible, we were fine, but there seemed to be like some kind of, he was like, here's the protocol to do it, and like laid it out for us. So it was really clear. Maybe businesses would like that kind of advice, could be helpful.
That's great. Keela, you should be on the panel. Is this for a retail store? I'm sorry.
Retail store.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. Okay, great. I had no idea.
It's happened like to almost all of my neighbors, like over years. Like this has been going on. I say this happened to us maybe like 10 years ago. It's been going on for a good long time.
Got it. That's great. I will also reach out to you offline to talk more about this and talk through it. And Ryder, you put something, a really great thing in the chat about what's the perspective of the disability advocates in having this conversation. We certainly are not to have them talk about what relevant engagement looks like with businesses. And that's a great point. And I have someone for that. And I'll share it with you to get your thoughts, and with the whole committee of who we should have on this panel, because I had met that person on a walking tour about this issue, and they had said about these egregious lawsuits, they were like they get the lawyer, gets the settlement, and then nothing's fixed. So it's like no one's winning here. They're also like not. And I'm not trying to speak for them, but that's great, and a great reminder that that's also a voice we need to have on this panel. So thank you for that, Ryder. Carter, did you have your hand up?
Ryder is absolutely right, because most of our businesses want to engage properly, and they're incredibly offended sometimes because they go out of their way, just like we heard Akila say, and then nevertheless they get a letter because there's something not right that they're maybe trying to do, or perhaps they don't have a bell, or they don't have the phone number, or it's not clear that there's an entrance around the corner that's accessible. you know, and that's the hard part, is joining the different people in the community together to understand how you can better communicate this to people, or little things and little steps that you can take in particular clearances inside a business, you know, particularly in eating and drinking places. That's an important part. Having a table that's set aside, that's wheelchair accessible. A lot of places don't have, you know, something that's comfortable for people to sit at, and it doesn't have all the right clearances. And it's not things that are readily apparent. In some cases, not everything may even be required, but people would like to know what they can do. And that's an engagement. You know, I've had a number of people come up to me, and it's legal engagement, and that's not a productive way to get change. And you know, I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you for that, Carter. And yes, Ryder, I would love to connect, or you can say who it is now if you'd like. I've never had to, I feel like I've never had to get you to speak up, so share with us.
I just put it in the chat.
Okay.
Sasha leads the Rise and Resist group on elevator access in subways, but he does a lot of work around mobility and access for people with mobility issues. And if not him, he'll know the right people.
Perfect. That's great. This is not the person I had, so even better. Thank you for that. Great. Well, guys, it's 8:44, and I know this went on longer than I promised, so thank you for sticking through and for participating. As always, feel free to reach out to me if you feel there's you know, emerging issues happening and we want to address, either with information on our committee page, or with a topic in a panel, or even just a presentation. It doesn't always have to be a panel, but I'm more than happy to corral and organize us around that. I know Kristen had brought up a really great, well, not great, it's, you know, it's sad. I don't know if you guys know, but Hudson Square Pharmacy closed, and that's a big retail space in Hudson Square. I know I've seen on Christopher, another independent pharmacy closed a little over a year ago, that was owned by a daughter and father, Sept. So, you know, our tiny pharmacies, you know, and also seeing a small deli on Hudson pushed out. Sorry, I happen to be very west side centric of our district because that's where I'm based. But you know, as you see these kind of patterns emerge, they do become topics or different things to address, and we don't always have to address it with a panel or you know, a speaker at a meeting. But you know, there are other things that we can do in the background to help move things along. So I will also, while Akila was talking and the different commentary on the ADA fees, obviously we need, I mean, it goes without saying, we need to have this issue put in our district needs statement. So I'll draft up something for that there. Any other comments, questions, or any other new business? Otherwise, I will move to adjourn if I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. A second. Thank you. All right, guys. I'm going to end this meeting. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.